My name is R. Crosby Lyles, and this is News from the Can. I'm putting this video up because this is the best video that I've seen so far. It was actually done 10 years ago. The name of the video is called Dan Britt - Orbits and Ice Ages, the History of Climate. It's from TheIHMC channel. TheIHMC channel. The reason I like it is because of the backstory, where Dan Britt comes from. He's actually the guy that took the samples. When you look at geologic history, temperatures of geologic history, and what we know about the last 500,000 years of climate change on Earth came from samples that this man took off of the ice cores, put in the machine, and studied. He's a geologist, essentially, and he'll tell you all the nuts and bolts, and he's entertaining to watch, and you get the big picture. So the big picture is that basically oil companies spent billions and billions of dollars to study climate change because climate change, the upshot of climate change is sea level rise. Sea level rise and fall is strongly correlated with the amount of CO2 that's in the atmosphere. That's it in a nutshell. Everything that we experience, this recent, that's the other reason I'm making this video, is this recent once-in-a-generation snowstorm that we had in the Northeast recently was worse than the one that we had in 1978. 50 people so far have died, people frozen in their cars and everything else. Bad storm, but it's in the noise. And what Dan Britt will tell you is that, heat waves, snowstorms, tornadoes, hurricanes, earthquakes, all that crap, sunspots, whether or not we have sunspots, the Maunder minimum, all that stuff is in the noise. Because the climate of the Earth is not a steady, straight line thing. It goes up and down. It oscillates. Climate oscillates, under whatever conditions that you have. But you've got CO2 is going up and up and up, but the CO2 level oscillates also. But climate within that oscillates. So you have signal and you have noise. And what this video is excellent about is he's telling you how to discern what's the difference between the signal and the noise of climate change. So all that stuff, those big snowstorms, the thing that happened in Texas a while back, on top of heat waves and floods and droughts and all that stuff, all that crap is in the noise. The signal is sea level rise, because rising CO2 levels prevent continental glaciation. If you don't have continental glaciation, then you have sea level rise. So what has driven climate change pre-industrial periods is the Milankovitch cycles. That's the eccentricity of Earth's orbit, and compared to how the precession of the Earth's poles. A lot of people out there, have been through this ad nauseum. And that's typically when the Earth's pole is tilted at the right direction according to where it is in the, if it's closer to the Earth or further away from the Earth. Essentially what you have is glaciation is caused by cold summers. So we're headed into the period that we're headed into, Milankovitch cycle-wise, we should be headed into a glacial period. It should be cold. And furthermore, the Earth is in an ice age. We've been in an ice age for 1 million years to 3 million years. So probably about 1 million years, the Earth has actually been in an ice age. So we're in as he will tell you, we're in an extraordinarily warm period, or warm trend of an extraordinarily cold period. So the Milankovitch cycle, where we are in the Milankovitch cycles, because the Milankovitch cycles has been over the past 500,000 years at least to 1 million years, has been the big driver of climate change. You can look at it and you can tell this. Sunspots, not so much. Like I said, even the Maunder minimum, according to Dan Britt, even the Maunder minimum is in the noise. So you hear a lot of talk about this, that we're going through the sun is going into hibernation, and that may be true. But even with all of that, the Earth should be getting colder, and it's not. The temperature is going up because the amount of CO2, the amount of greenhouse gas in the atmosphere is greater. So temperature is actually a lot warmer than it should be, because where we are in the Milankovitch cycles says we should be getting colder. We should be going into a glacial period, and we're not. So again, glaciation is what causes the sea level to go down. You don't have glaciation, sea level goes up. And what's normal, to hear him tell it, what's normal for the Earth, if you look back over geologic time, is for Florida to be covered with 80 feet of water, and to have tropical conditions up all the way at the Arctic Circle. That's what's normal. So we've been in an ice age, something that's not necessarily normal. Normal is a setting on a washing machine, but that's essentially it. That's the bottom line. And the reason that the reason that the Earth became colder is because the Tibetan Plateau rose up to 18,000 feet. The rock weathering sucked all the CO2 out of the atmosphere, and the Earth became much colder. So the total amount in the atmosphere during the Cretaceous period, I think, was 1,700 parts per million. That was basically always there. I mean, that was basically what the concentration was in the atmosphere all the time during the Cretaceous period of CO2 in the atmosphere during the Cretaceous period. So after the Tibetan Plateau rose up and sucked all the CO2 out of the atmosphere, there was about 600 gigatons of CO2 in the atmosphere in pre-industrial times. And now we're putting 9 gigatons of CO2 in the atmosphere every year. Every year. So, and you can pretty much thank China for that. China and India, they're just like burning coal like nobody's business. And he'll tell you it was like some ridiculous thing, like they're building a gigawatt coal-fired power plant or every so many days. It was like a really ridiculous amount in China. Now, this is 10 years ago that he did this talk here. So, but that's the upshot, and I'm doing this because, this is a subject of my channel, and this is baseline state of the art. This video, again, this video is the best video that I've seen for lay people to watch and learn about what exactly the whole nuts and bolts of climate change, the whats and wherefores and whys and all that stuff. It's in a nice, tight 55, 56-minute package. The guy's entertaining. He's nice. It's fun to listen to. And he basically lays the whole shit out. It's easy to understand, and you can get the whole package right there. It's easy to understand, and this is the state of the art. Okay, what I'm doing is kind of sort of, I'm on an outlier because of Art Bell and Whitley Strieber, who are like, they're like pariahs or something, and climate-wise, because they're not climate scientists. Well, Art Bell is dead, rest in peace. But the reason they wrote the book, The Coming Global Superstorm, which turned into The Day After Tomorrow, is because of things that were found that are not necessarily part of what is classically referred to as a geologic record. The geologic record is studied by geologists. Dan Britt is a geologist, and what they discovered were things like woolly mammoths with green vegetation in their mouths, frozen in the snow for 10,000 years, or longer than that, I guess it would have to be. So there were a lot of things in their book that they discussed that I'd never heard of until I read about it in their book. Folding of the tropopause, which is a thing, a stratospheric intrusion, which is what is the subject of their book, and NCEP, National Center for Environmental Phenomenon. The National Center for Environmental Phenomenon, they put up a couple of satellites to study folding of the tropopause and stratospheric intrusion. where the stratosphere, the cold temperature of the stratosphere can just dive down. It's, cyclogenesis, bombogenesis is where a lot of that stuff comes from. So, with imbalances between the warm temperature of the sea surface and cold temperatures in the stratosphere, you can have you can have your jet streams start whipping to a certain level, and then weird things happen with Coriolis forces, and the wind will change direction and do funky things. And this is essentially what happened. We had a situation where there was an extraordinarily strong, wide band of jet stream coming off of China and right over Japan, and then it took a hard left and went and wrapped up into the Arctic and came back down and produced that massive jet stream down into the continental United States. So, and you can see some of that here, but it was very pronounced. And this is a function of climate change. This has been talked about ad nauseum. You got a weakening of the polar vortex with global warming, with CO2 and global warming. You get a weakening of the vortex, and then you have these whipsaw things that happen with the jet stream, and that causes warm air to get conveyed up further north than it should be, and cold air to come down further south than it should really be. So it's just one of those things that can produce massive amount of frozen precipitation and rain, hail, and all kinds of crazy stuff. So again, what Dan Britt will tell you circa 10 years ago is that all of this stuff, your La Niñas, El Niños, volcanic activity that can cause, like Hunga Tonga just blew up, and if you look at the 2-meter temperature anomaly, air temperature up to 2 meters above the ground across the equator, and that's pretty cool. That could potentially be from Hunga Tonga. Now they're talking about like a lot of material. Hunga Tonga's down here, South Pacific area, and Hunga Tonga, Hunga up high, blew a whole bunch of water all the way up into the mesosphere, to hear them tell it. So that's going to do something. And they're saying that, well, because it's water vapor, then they expected somehow or another that to cause global warming instead of global cooling, like other volcanoes like Pinatubo. Pinatubo kicked a lot of trash up into the stratosphere, and we had a drop in global temperature from that. And Mount Chichun, I don't know where that is, I think it's in Mexico or something, blew up, and we had temperatures in the teens in Florida for a week in 1983. It was so cold that, I tell the story repeatedly, it was so cold that we had an oil burner furnace at the house that I used to live in Gainesville, Florida, and the oil froze in the tank. So we had to go and get we didn't have any money. We had to go get diesel fuel. Like, I think it was number 2 or number 3 diesel, something like that, to put in there to burn in the oil burner because it was freezing. So all that variability is in the noise, according to Dan Britt. So all of what we're going through now, Hunga Tonga and all of that stuff, El Nino and La Nina cycles, is all in the noise. We've had an extended La Nina, apparently, right? And so that's going to affect how wet or dry winters and summers are around the world in different regions and things like that. So we've had, and that La Nina is from this patch of cold water here that apparently is going through an extended period. But this is an oscillation. So this will go from totally blue to totally red. And there's a decadal oscillation here and a decadal oscillation in the northern Atlantic, the southern Atlantic, and in different places around the globe. Now, Can this anomalously cold patch of sea water, can that be related to Hunga Tonga? It's possible. But again, to hear Dan Britt talk about it, to hear him tell it, all of this is in the noise. So, you know, and here we have, if you zoom in on this, you can see that this is a mixture. You have a cold stream that basically a cold current that comes down off of, it's off of Nova Scotia up here. And you can see that this temperature, this water temperature here is actually 10 to 20 degrees below nominal, mixed in with, you know, much warmer temperatures. But what this looks like is that one of the things that they will tell you when the AMOC shuts down is that the warm water will actually start piling up along the northeast coast, the northeastern seaboard. Right next to the landmass, you can see that that temperature is pink and white. White is nominal. So nominal for the sea surface, I believe, is 1971 to 2000. The air temperature is 78 to 2000. I don't know why they do it like that, but they do. Anyway, so you can see right next to the shoreline there that that's a few degrees below nominal, right around the coastline. And then the water temperature right near, basically part of the Gulf Stream, is up to maybe 3 or 4 degrees above nominal. For that part where you see the Gulf Stream going across. Now, what's important to also look at here is that it looks as though, you see how this kind of curves up here like this. And if I look at the water temperature itself, the actual water temperature and not the, we got it zoomed in here so I can actually, so you can see the color. If you look at the actual sea surface temperature and not the sea surface temperature anomaly, it's also important to point out, very important to point out, that sea surface temperature anomaly is not a temperature. So when you see sea surface temperature anomaly, that anomaly is not necessarily driving a wind current. It's not necessarily driving a rise in air. You know, it's not an updraft. It's not driving any kind of an updraft because you're just seeing an anomaly. You look at the actual temperature, then you might be able to glean a difference in what's happening weather-wise, because sea surface temperatures do have a tendency to drive certain types of weather, blocking currents and blocking patterns and things like that. That's where the overturning current comes in. There's a blocking pattern that happens because of the Gulf Stream. When you don't have that blocking pattern, that blocking current there, then extraordinarily cold temperatures just go right into Europe and freeze Europe over. So again, what Dan Britt will tell you is that glaciation comes from cold summers. No cold summers, no glaciation. No glaciation, sea level rise. That's pretty much the upshot. And there's that. And that's kind of interesting. So that white there is damn near freezing right there. The pink is 5 degrees. So that's about 40 degrees Fahrenheit, 5 degrees Celsius. And it looks as though sea surface temperature is sagging in the eastern Atlantic. So this temperature here is probably about 50 degrees, something like that, the light blue, somewhere in that, 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Might be 10 degrees Celsius, somewhere in there. And that is kind of a new thing. So I didn't really see him talking too much about that, but you know, I'll tell you, a lot of that stuff's in the noise anyway. Now here's my contention with a lot of this stuff is that has to do with atmospheric science, has to do with chemistry and thermodynamics of gases and things like that. This is what I've noticed, that water that is saturated with carbon dioxide has a lower heat capacity than just water, CO2. In the atmosphere, CO2 is very soluble in water. Methane is not. So any methane that's released from the ocean goes straight for the stratosphere, unless it reacts sooner rather than later with, you know, the hydroxyls that are in the atmosphere and so forth and so on. It becomes oxidized. Methane turns into water vapor and carbon dioxide essentially, but also you have some formaldehyde that's released from different sources, forests and things like that. Formaldehyde is, you know, like a methyl type of, you know, thing. So carbon dioxide is very soluble in water. So any carbon dioxide is released is essentially going to nucleates droplets also. So a droplet of water that has carbon dioxide in it, that nucleates around carbon dioxide, is going to have a very high saturation of carbon dioxide. So that means that its heat capacity is going to be much less, meaning that it's going to freeze faster. So it's noted that sudden changes in climate, sudden changes in global temperature must come from changes in the atmosphere. And my belief is that what happens, you know, every glacial period is preceded by a period of advanced global warming. So there, to me, the way I look at it is, at some point in that advanced global warming, there's maybe a clathrate release, or there's a mass melting of permafrost, a mass release of methane, and so that methane goes straight for the stratosphere where it, you know, reacts with all the stuff that it reacts with, and then you end up with carbon dioxide and water vapor in the stratosphere, essentially. So that carbon dioxide can also nucleate water droplets, and then you can end up with more ice crystals in the stratosphere, mesosphere maybe, which has an albedo effect. It's true that stratospheric clouds, and I can't remember the guy's name who did the study on this, that cirrus clouds hold heat in, you know, that can cause a certain amount of global warming. Because one of the theories about global warming is that when you trap, so the way that the Earth works in terms of it's the air conditioning system on Earth is where evaporation at the surface, an endothermic process. So the heat is gathered from evaporation at the surface, convection carries it up to the cloud tops, and then you have condensation, which is an exothermic process. It releases the heat. So if you have greenhouse gas above the cloud tops, or something that block the heat from the cloud tops, and that heat can't entirely escape. So it's like throwing a blanket over the top of a condenser of your air conditioner. It drives up the heat of the whole system. That's the theory that basically I've heard so far in a nutshell about that, about you know, runaway global warming and all this kind of stuff. So there are a lot of moving parts in this thing. And the reason I want to give this out is because this is a fabulous overview. It's entertaining. It's not horribly technical. It's to the point. It's done in a nice linear way that's easy to understand and see all the parts that are involved. So you know, it's a great piece. To me, it's like a go-to piece, and this is a recommendation. So if you want to know what's going on, watch that video and listen to what the guy has to say. my caveat is all about that. Is all about gas kinetics and and what happens with CO2, because my opinion is that you can reach certain temperatures where basically all the CO2 can just get sucked out of the atmosphere at one time. You drop down below a certain temperature, if you have the right amount of water vapor and the right amount of CO2 in the atmosphere and the stratosphere, that it'll basically fall out all at once, and you can have situations where the sun is blocked. That it'll the atmosphere, or the upper atmosphere, will turn into one big blanket of puffy white clouds and block the sun out. And in which case, solar panels don't work in those conditions. So funky things can happen. I see these titles like "A Funny Thing Happened on the way to climate change" and stuff like that. Nobody knows. I don't know. Nobody knows. But that's why we trust experts. And I would say that Dan Britt's pretty much of an expert, and this is a pretty well laid out piece here. I don't know Dan Britt from Adam's House Cat, you know what I'm saying? But he is a professor. He is an expert. He was there from the beginning, and this is not I don't do paid promotions at all on my channel at all, and that's it. There it is. And again, the reason I put this up is because of current events. Once in a generation snowstorm hits. That's by the way it was preceded by firestorms and heat waves and floods and droughts and this and that, and he'll tell you all that stuff is in the noise. It all comes down to glaciation. Cold summers cause glaciation. If you don't have cold summers, you don't have glaciation, and you necessarily have sea level rise. Unless you have a catastrophic, to me, and he didn't say this, I'm saying this, unless you have a catastrophic frozen period that happens, it's an effect of the atmosphere where the carbon dioxide just gets sucked out of the atmosphere from extreme cold and massive amounts of frozen precipitation. So we'll see, sea level temperatures are up. I mean, that's a fact of life. That's a fact of life. And we'll see what happens. But anyway, that's all I got. I love you guys. Like I said in my statement of purpose on my channel, it's better to be prepared for whatever. There's a picture floating around on Twitter of yet another front door that was sealed in with snow, which is why if you live in areas, especially where there's lake effect snow or whatever, keep your snow shovel inside the house. If you live where it snows, right, anywhere above I usually say anywhere above the 40th parallel, but anywhere above the 30th parallel, if you live in anywhere where it snows, keep your snow shovel inside the house. Somewhere where you can, in case you got to dig your way out, because, shit happens. And watch out how you have your, if you got a generator, watch out how you have that thing hooked up, because one of the 50 people that died in this past storm died from carbon monoxide poisoning. It's a thing. That's why sleeping in your car with the heater on may not necessarily be a good idea. Quick tip on that, you might put your smoke alarm, if it has a carbon monoxide detector in it, put it in your car. If you got to do it like that, I mean, I wouldn't. So it's also a good reason to have, a jug of water and a little bit of food and toilet paper and blankets and stuff like that in your car whenever you even make short trips. There were, of those 50 people that died in the snowstorm, a lot of people were found frozen to death in their cars, not very far from their house, got stuck in the snow and froze the fuck to death. So y'all, keep extra supplies of food and water and medicine and, medications for your pets and pet food, and you know, I mean, if the shit really hits the fan, it's also good, even if you don't drink, to have booze around, because it's booze and carton of cigarettes, you know, like regular Marlboro or something like that, you know, that's because those things you can trade. Matches, aspirin, diapers, baby diapers, stuff like that. I mean, that's if the shit really hits the fan, and you got to like barter, you know, like the cash machines don't work and stuff like that. But I don't like to go there, because that's not what I do. You know, this is all about advising people that the shit is hitting the fan in unexpected ways. In the same areas where you might be buried in snow, you also might drown in a motherfucking flood too. Because in New York State, the same place where the person opened their front door, and this happened in Wales a couple of years ago, where the front door was blocked from floor to ceiling with snow. In that same state, in New York City, not that long ago, last year, somebody drowned in their New York City apartment from a flood. So, you know, got to pay attention to what's going on. You don't have to be afraid. Don't be afraid. Be prepared. Watch what's going on in the weather. Look at your surroundings. Where do you live? Do you live in a flood zone? You know, do you live where it snows? Keep your snow shovel in the house. Just some real common sense stuff like that. Don't be afraid. Be prepared. That's all. And there's nothing to fear but fear itself. I'm not a fear monger. We don't do that here. But anyway, this is the to me, this is the state of the art. You know, this is the state of the art, and I gotta put that out there, because I have to tell you this for due diligence purposes. So this is due diligence stuff. But anyway, it's a good video. You should watch it if you're interested in any of this kind of stuff, because there's an ocean of crap out there. People talking about the climate. To me, this is pretty definitive, and you can tell. You know, 10 years ago, almost 1 million views, something like that. But this is the good stuff. Anyway, that's it. That's all I got. I love you guys, man. Take care. Pay attention to the weather. You know, find those sources. You know, those trusted sources. And that's all I got. If you like this content, please rate, comment, subscribe. Once again, I don't do paid promotional material anywhere on my channel. And that's it. Thanks for watching. See you.